Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hey, hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
I'm Chris Huddleston.
And today, we're very excited to be here in person, as happens occasionally, in the same town where we grew up, being able to do this podcast together instead of on opposite ends of a Zoom thing. We're on the same end of a Zoom thing. But today, we're going to be talking about a brand new release, which we do from time to time. So if you're not interested in hearing us spoil something that just came out that you might want to see for yourself, then we encourage you to not watch this one and go check it out and come back. Today, we are going to be talking about The Matrix Resurrections. So this is The Matrix 4. Do you have a synopsis for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. So this one is directed by Lana Wachowski, and it stars Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne Moss, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, probably butchered that, Jonathan Groff, and Neil Patrick Harris. And the synopsis from Rotten Tomatoes: to find out if his reality is a physical or mental construct, Mr. Anderson, aka Neo, will have to choose to follow the White Rabbit once more. If he's learned anything, it's that choice, while an illusion, is still the only way out of or into the Matrix. Neo already knows what he has to do, but what he doesn't yet know is that the Matrix is stronger, more secure, and far more dangerous than ever before. I don't know if that's what happened in the movie or not.
Yeah, I think that, I don't want to tip my hand here, but that makes it sound a lot more highbrow than I got.
Exactly, yeah. So what did you think?
Yeah, I think when we talk about these movies, we need to talk about expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had my heart broken with sequels so many times, including The Matrix 2 and 3.
Yeah, for sure.
Loved The Matrix, as many people did. Felt that The Matrix was aimed. Well, I felt that The Matrix was for me and for everybody else. And then I went back and watched the sequels and was bitterly disappointed when I saw them when they first were released. And I don't know that I could articulate precisely why at the time. Went back recently, rewatched 2 and 3, or at least parts of it, and realized, or I felt, oh, these movies weren't aimed at me. These movies were aimed at a younger audience.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the relationship between Neo and Trinity in those movies, it was a lot more like high school or even junior high school romance, where they got jealous of each other, and there were other, there's another female character that Trinity gets jealous of. And at the time I was like, what is happening? And then I thought, well, if this is aimed at a 13-year-old, I read the movie differently.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm not quite sure who this was aimed at. I feel like this was aimed at people who loved it, loved it the first time around. It felt a little bit like a reunion tour, like, hey, we're getting the band back together and we're all in our 60s and it's going to be great, man. And the prevailing thing was like, we're just going to have a lot of fun revisiting this universe. I didn't really have a lot of fun revisiting this universe. I thought the fight sequences were mostly pretty tepid and forgettable. We don't get we do get Smith and Morpheus back, but we don't get Hugo Weaving and help me out, Lawrence Fishburne as their roles. We get new faces.
And why were they new? Did you understand that?
I don't know. I assume that Lawrence Fishburne and Hugo Weaving just said pass.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, nah, we don't.
So you don't think it was a purposeful thing, that it was like they purposely wrote them out of it to have new?
I doubt it.
Yeah,
I think
it doesn't really
if
make
they
sense
could have gotten
that they would.
Hugo Weaving and Lawrence Fishburne back, they'd have gotten them.
Right.
No offense against the people that they put in those roles now, but it felt like the script needed to sort of explainarate why it's different faces,
mm-hmm.
right? And this movie, like the sequels, does an awful lot of talking,
mm-hmm.
a lot of explainarating is my term for it. It's visually pretty slick. I'll tell you the one thing I really did enjoy about this movie was seeing Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss reprise their roles together opposite each other. I think they always had great chemistry opposite each other, even though I didn't like movies 2 and 3 across the whole series. And that comes back to life here in a way that is, I mean, we're all older, but that it just felt rich and anchored that for me. But we kind of find him choosing to take the red or the blue pill again. And I don't know. I just didn't. Your text to me was meh. I think that
I've been calling it the metrics, MEH, because that's kind of how. I had very similar views on the previous movies. The original Matrix, I would say sci-fi movies of the last 20, 25 years, it's up there among the best. And I was like you, I didn't like the 2 sequels at all. And I saw them in the theater and I've never revisited them. And I know that's a pretty common, a lot of people were disappointed by this, but for whatever reason, I would say I was cautiously optimistic going into this. The trailers looked good. And I kind of went into it thinking, well, the first one was really revolutionary and this kind of groundbreaking thing in terms of special effects that we hadn't really seen before. And I thought maybe with 20 years of advancements that we might see something like that again. It's like, you can say what you want about James Cameron and Avatar, but I think you discount him at your peril. He's proven it's like Titanic, it's going to be a big flop, and it was massive. And Avatar, it's going to be a big, and now it's like they're making these movies 15 years later or whatever, and he's making 3 or 4 of them back to back. But I'm certain, if anything, you're going to be blown away technologically, I think, by those films. And I thought maybe the Matrix, this new Matrix, might do that a little bit, and it doesn't. I don't have a problem with any of the performances. I think all the acting is fine. But like the second and third, I just kind of found myself not caring. I didn't hate it. I was entertained by it, but I saw it with a couple of friends and they're in the theater. So this you can see in the theater or on HBO Max. And my friends said, if it wouldn't have been for me being there, they probably would have walked out. They hated it that much. I think you are seeing possibly, so this was just one Wachowski instead of the 2 together on, and I forget the other. So this is Lana. I forget the other Wachowski sibling, what the name is, but for whatever reason, they chose not to return for this. And it feels kind of like a one-trick pony thing to me, where the Matrix was this, really amazing, groundbreaking movie. And then everything that they've done since then. So they did these couple of sequels, and then they did Speed Racer, which I haven't seen, so I shouldn't bash it, but it didn't seem too appealing to me. And
nobody grabbed you and said, you have to see this movie.
Exactly. So. Yeah. And Cloud Atlas as well. And you said something, we were talking the other night, that I didn't know, and this explains a lot to me, that the original Matrix script, somebody else wrote it and it was a contest or something.
That is a story that I have heard. I can't confirm that. I don't know that. The story that I heard, whether it is true or not, was that they had some sort of a contest for scripts because they wanted to make a movie, and that whomever wrote The Matrix submitted it, and they selected it and were paid whatever comparatively small amount, probably pretty decent for a script at the time. I mean, when I was just out of grad school, if you were a nobody and you wrote a first script and a studio wanted to buy it, you might get $150,000 for the script, and you did a backflip because you think Awesome.
50 grand, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for me. And, the studio's buying, my names could be on it. I don't know what the details of that were, but considering what it then went on to make, again, what I've heard is then that person has sued and won settlement because I presume some portion of that initial script agreement wasn't honored and their name wasn't attached. The insinuation is that the Wachowskis passed it off as their original material when there was an author involved and felt slighted enough and won in court. Now, maybe all that's baloney, and I don't know. That's what I heard. And it makes a certain kind of, it's not a conspiracy theory, but it makes a certain sense when you look at 2 and 3, if the kernel of the idea, the sort of brainchild that was the Matrix script, which is really when you look at the Matrix, it's a pretty tidy little Messiah story, right? I mean, it's like he's the one, he has to come to believe that he's the one, and when he comes to believe the one, he sort of saves the world. Although we don't actually get that far. He doesn't really save the world, but he fulfills the prophecy. And then for 2 and 3, what we see is what it feels like is they're struggling to figure out not just, I mean, I think if you look at 2 and 3, there's kind of one movie's worth of story there, stretched, milked out into 2 whole feature-length things, probably because the studio was like, we got a goose that lays golden eggs here. We're going to give you a 2-movie deal. Yeah. And it was kind of like, okay, then there's a rave scene that goes on for 5 minutes. Maybe we can make that 7 minutes. And it's not driving anything forward, right? So I don't know if that's true, but it feels kind of true. I always had my kind of, if I could go back in time and have the Matrix 2 and 3 that I wanted, it would always be that Matrix 2 was a prequel about the humans and the war with the machines, like we've seen in
the Animatrix.
Animatrix touches on that a little bit, whether it's the actual war of the machines or it ends with the war of the machines, but totally different. Like before all this happened, because they say in the Matrix, we don't know who burned the sky or whatever. You kind of leave these characters completely, or you see an earlier iteration of the Matrix altogether, and there's the sort of anomaly, the sort of Neo of that time, an earlier version of it. And maybe it feels like The Empire Strikes Back. Maybe it feels like a tragedy. And we know what's coming, or we hope what's coming. And then the third movie would be picking up where we leave off, and maybe not necessarily what we see, but there's some sort of resolution of a world post-Matrix where the machines and the humans, some of them choose, like maybe Matrix 4 is Neo wakes up, he's back in the Matrix, and the twist or the revelation is you chose to go back in here. Like there's a human society outside now, and we do coexist, but there's a lot of people that think it's better, and the Matrix is kind of a utopia. And you, Thomas Anderson, actually wanted to go back in. So now you're like, let me out. Fine. That would be kind of like, there would be a way to make each one mind bending. That was so great. It was, the camera effects were revolutionary and unique and created for it at the time. And that was absolutely visually awesome. But I think that was, what was really mind-bending about it was this, is it the ontological argument? You're the philosophy guy. What if we're all brains in a jar? What if this is all a simulation? Yeah. I don't remember the philosopher, and I don't know enough about philosophy, but there is this philosophical argument of like, how do we know that reality is real and that this could all just be input somehow, that I thought made that unit. And so we as the audience are struggling to believe with Neo, right? Because it all seems so real. What if a spoon is not a spoon? Or like, how would you convince yourself
Yeah.
that you could just bend spoons. Like, how could you bring yourself to believe the unbelievable?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's all part of what makes that original movie so effective. But we haven't seen anything that feels revolutionary or world bending, spoon bending, if you will, in the other three movies. But you're right. It wasn't terrible. I wouldn't have walked out of it.
No.
It was just, I think I went to 2 and 3 and watched 4, hoping I was going to get something like that was going to knock me out of my seat, like that first one did. And
and I think, we've had all these, because what is it, like 18 years since the last one or something. So we've had all this time to mellow on it, I guess. And one thing that I read this week that I guess is true, I mean, isn't a rumor or anything, is that
we could look it up. I mean, I'm sure we can Wikipedia
that HBO or Warner Brothers or whatever was going to make this new film with or without the involvement of and they were just going to do it. They're just basically like, we're going to do this. So you wonder, my guess is I wonder if she said, okay, maybe she didn't have an amazing idea or anything, but it was
if
kind
you're
of
going to
like,
do it, I want to be
involved. I want to be the one to do it rather than somebody else, because this is my creation.
If you're going to do it, I can get Keanu. And it could have been
true. Yeah. But maybe they wouldn't have come back.
You were telling me about the Blade Runner animated stuff that, in Star Wars, Tron, like a lot of properties, they are making sort of within the universe animated series. And I would think that the Matrix as a property is ripe for that kind of a thing.
Sure. Well, and I would say we touched on it a little bit, but I would say this is kind of maybe
not just the Animatrix, but like a whole series. Where
sure. Yeah, for sure.
Take it places that it hasn't necessarily.
Yeah, with the Neo, and the other characters. But this is kind of getting into our recommendation part. But in terms of a recommendation, if you're somebody who liked the first Matrix movie and were maybe iffy on the other ones, I would say skip this and watch the Animatrix, because I'm sure there are way fewer people who saw the Animatrix than saw the movies. And as I remember, the Animatrix I thought was really great.
There was a lot to recommend it. It was
it's super weird.
It's an anthology of anime shorts. Is all of it anime?
Yeah, it's all anime.
By
different directors and different studios. So the styles are a little different,
Some of them, one of them at least, is very dark. One of them that shows the War of the Machines
that's pretty
painful. The machines are kind of tearing people apart. It's like, how? But lots of interesting stuff in there if you're into the universe. I didn't ever play the video games or any of that stuff either.
I don't think I
this references the video game a lot, and I thought, was there a Matrix video game? And then I kind of was reading an article about it that referenced I was like, I bet there was, and I bet it was really popular.
Yeah. I don't recall playing that. That brings up two thoughts based on what you said. One, so the Animatrix, we have, where it's pretty dark and violent. And this was something that I was thinking watching this. So all of the movies have been rated R. Why did this need to be rated R? There's some profanity. It's not particularly violent.
Is there some profanity? I don't even remember.
They swore a little bit in it, but I'm not even sure why.
By today's standards.
I'm not even sure why it got an R rating, to be honest.
There's no nudity.
There's
no blood, right?
It's not even like
there's a bunch of, CGI bullets and spraying, it's just like people doing flips and.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Even the fight scenes were just kind of pedestrian, I thought. They're shot really, I felt like they were really tight, zoomed in, and when I would have preferred them to be a little wider. So I don't know, they just felt kind of claustrophobic to me.
I don't want to get on another rant about practical effects, because certainly the original Matrix had a lot of computer.
Mm-hmm.
But the feel of it was that they played a lot with slow-mo and wire work and using that camera thing where, you know, you leap up in the air and go to super slow-mo and then, you know, it would rotate around. I'm thinking when they first go into the building to free Morpheus, and there's a shot where he's doing these sort of cartwheels where he's going like that in slow-mo and shooting the whole way. And it really was it was a kind of a ballet in slow motion, and sort of this parkour on the walls,
right?
And the casings falling through the air, and it's absurd in how over the top the munitions and everything are, but it's all very deliberate. And each shot, I mean, I remember sitting there thinking simultaneously, like, that's absurd, and that is so cool.
Yeah.
And that's actually oddly beautiful, you know? But it was all very choreographed.
That first 20 or 30 minutes, I was really on board. And you have I don't even remember, you know, we should, there's not a lot of research here, but the woman with the blue, the woman with the blue hair.
She was great.
I thought she was really great. And, you know, she's jumping around, and there would be scenes where she would jump and land on the edge of a building, and they would freeze frame there for a second as the stone or the concrete kind of crumbles under her feet. And then she leaped, and I was like, this is really, really great.
Yeah.
And they never really came back to that all that much. I didn't feel.
And that part felt like, oh, okay, so now we're back in the Matrix, but not new. So 20 years later, we're kind of like, are we just going to make another movie so we're just going to do the Matrix again?
Yeah, I went into this. I tried to stay away from spoilers, but I did read a couple of reviews going into it, and I saw more than one person say this kind of reminded them of a bit of The Force Awakens, where it was like sort of a remake and sort of a sequel, and it did feel like that a bit to me. As far as the CG, with you watching the other movies, it was fairly recently that you watched them?
Yeah, a couple of months ago.
Okay. Did you feel like the CG in this, like particularly I was noticing you know, when they're in the you know, they're kind of being harvested or whatever it is, that, you know, in those pods, and it was like, it doesn't look terrible, but this is clearly CG. Could you really see that the CG in this was any better than those movies?
You know,
I didn't
really.
Maybe you'd have to see them like back to back.
And I didn't see it in the theater
true,
either.
Yeah.
But I didn't rewatch the sequels in the theater. You know, my problem with the sequels was not the quality of the effects. It was the story.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so I didn't. You know, they brought a kind of a zombie element into this. They call it like mob mode or something, and maybe that's a reference to the video game, but where instead of the agents just kind of taking over any individual, propping from person to person at will, that they could sort of co-opt whole groups of people. So you get this kind of zombie mode where people would go and their eyes would fill with the Matrix for some reason. And there's one where people are jumping out of buildings, kind of becoming human missiles as Neo or Trinity, or maybe both of them, are riding a motorcycle down the street. And so you're seeing these bodies fall and hit the pavement. And that scene struck me as like, that's edgy. It made me think of 9/11. It made me think, you know, I thought that's kind of upsetting. And something we haven't seen before. But there wasn't a whole bunch of that. So I don't know if the quality of CG was better or not. I saw it on like I don't know, it's like a 50-inch TV instead of in the theater.
Yeah.
And you know, to be fair, these movies are really meant to be seen in the theater.
Right.
But the effects have never been my problem.
No.
Like I didn't love,
not at all.
In the sequels, I didn't love the twins with the dreadlocks, like the twin white guys. Okay. but I didn't love it.
Mm-hmm.
It just started to feel like, how can we take the couture element somehow and like spin that? I'm like, it's not about the couture. It's, I get it. They look sharp because they can look any way they want, but that's not the substance of the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Another sort of the flip side of that with the kind of 9/11 elements, this movie is jokey. There's a lot of, and I don't remember, there might have been here or there in the previous films, a funny line, but Neo is, he's this video game designer, and there's a good bit in the beginning with him in the company that he works for, and these guys that all work there, and they're all cracking jokes.
Like,
and it was
game design.
Yeah, game design company. And I felt like all of that really fell flat. And it was just like, I don't want to spend time with these guys, But I don't recall them being jokey in the other films to that degree.
No, certainly the original one was deadly serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This definitely felt like, we're seeing this with everything, where you almost feel as if the studios at this point are so desperate for one, because from what I read, and I guess we'll see what happens, this didn't open particularly well. I guess it's doing okay on HBO Max, but the studio is wanting to do more of these, and I guess
more Matrix,
more Matrix, yeah. And it just feels like with everything, the studios are saying, "Hey, you've heard of this thing, right? Everybody remembers the Matrix, and it doesn't matter if it's something that came out a year ago or it came out 20 years ago or a movie from the 50s or whatever. It's like, we are going to find everything that anyone has ever liked and figure out a way that we can make sequels and reboots or what, you know what I mean?"
Well, they want sure things.
They want sure things. And I don't know that is the Matrix a sure thing. I mean, the first one was a massive hit.
I think they think it was, because the first one was such a massive hit.
The next two made money, but they were viewed as, and I'd have to look up the box office, but I know that the second and third, I don't believe, did as well as the original. And I definitely know that the perception was these aren't as good as the original. So they were taking something.
They weren't as good.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that are like, oh, the third one is my favorite movie or whatever. But so they, it's kind of, it makes me think of Terminator. You have Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. They're both classics. And they, how many have they made? And it's just, everybody loved the Terminator, so we're going to make more of these.
How many have they made? Four,
5.
Did they make 5?
6. I mean, there's at least 5.
So T1 and T2,
maybe 6,
both James Cameron.
Mm-hmm.
T3 was not James Cameron,
but Arnold was back for that.
Was T3 the female Terminator?
The female Terminator.
T4.
Then they did the one with Christian Bale. Mm-hmm.
So T5.
Then they did the one with the woman from Game of Thrones, which I never saw. T5? That one. Yeah, that's what was that? Terminator Genesis.
Yeah, okay.
And then they did the one where they got Linda Hamilton back. So is that 6?
T6.
Yeah. And we don't want to get off on necessarily a side tangent. I kind of liked that one. Did you see it?
I think I've seen them all.
I never saw Genesis.
It's not
the Christian Bale
again,
one.
It's not terrible. It's just you keep wanting it to be T1 or T2. You keep wanting it to be James Cameron.
Christian Bale one was terrible.
It did not work.
But
it had its moments, though. There was cool stuff in it.
Yeah.
But it didn't float.
But so, and maybe the Terminator is dead but I'm sure they'll make another one at some point. They'll do something. And that's kind of how these aren't as necessarily as bad as what the Terminator got to be. But anyway, it's just they're going to take and I guess I can't even complain about it anymore because it doesn't take away from those original films, but it's just they're going to take anything that somebody has heard of and watched and liked and it made money and figure out a way to, and we're seeing that that's not always going to work.
Well, it's the same gripe though with the Matrix and the Terminator. It's the same gripe that you've got a property where the concept hits because you're like, oh, that's totally original, right? And people love it and rewatch it and buy the DVD and because you're just like, I've never seen anything like that before. Cameron is really good at making sequels because he is really good at turning it. Like he did the same thing with Alien, from Ridley Scott's Alien to Aliens, where he's like, all right, it is going to be more of the same and it's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the monster in the shadows. This one, it's an action movie where there's a whole bunch of monsters and it's a shoot 'em up. And, we gotta fall back as far as we can before they overrun us. With Terminator, right? It's the single robot comes back in time. We all know the Terminator T2. Oh, now the bad robot's on the good guy's side. And it's a totally different liquid guy, right? But when he stepped back off of it and they kept trying to remake that, like, oh, so three's a different Terminator. Like you already did the different Terminator.
Mm-hmm.
You have to reinvent the property.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the problem is with the Matrix is like, oh, you love the Matrix. Great. We're going to make two more of the same. And you're like, no, we loved it because you created something new. You get two more movies and it's awesome and we'll see them, but you have to reinvent the property. Mm-hmm. So it's not. So when I go and rewatch T2, it's because I'm in the mood for Arnold as a good guy. And when I go and rewatch T1, it's Arnold as a bad guy. And when I watch Alien, same thing with Aliens. It's like they're different types of movie within it being the same property.
Right.
So
I feel like Cameron the guy could, I mean, I'm sure he has more money than he can ever spend, but
he could reinvent the Terminator property somehow.
People got mad about those Terminator movies because with each one, Cameron would come out, and some he was involved, some of the later ones he was involved with to some degree, and some he wasn't. And with each one, he would come out and say, oh, it's really good. And then the movie would kind of suck and people would be upset with Cameron. And I basically think either he just didn't want to crap on the people who were doing, or it was just, well, I'm going to make more money this way if I'm not going to, talk it down. And
why don't we pivot a little bit to talk about what we just watched? So we're going to summarize this and we're going to move on to another thing. So would you recommend this to people?
I mean, I would not recommend to go to see it in the theater. If you have HBO Max and you're curious, I'm definitely not a Matrix super fan. I love the first one, and the other ones are, various degrees of mediocre to bad. So I would say skip this one. Like I say, I would recommend, if you haven't seen the Animatrix, watch that. I don't know if that's on HBO Max or not, but
I don't know where you find that. I mean, but I would more or less,
if it's streaming somewhere, watch it. It's really good.
I would say meh.
Yeah.
We've definitely reviewed worse movies. I didn't have a hard time sitting through this. Like, I would not have gotten up and left the theater. No. It does have a comic element to it, and I like watching actors impersonate other actors, like we were talking about Batman Giz. Dad, we've got to go down, talk with the people. I think that's fun. So you have Jonathan Groff, who does a Mr. Anderson. He's doing homage to Hugo Weaving, and they play with that a little bit in a couple of ways, like at last when he sees him, and that's a giggle.
Yeah, none of the performances were bad. We didn't even talk about Neil Patrick Harris. His performance was good.
Yeah, he's a pro. It's just
and like I say, we should know the names, but the woman with the blue hair I thought was really great, and it's great to see I mean, everybody loves Keanu.
With Jonathan Groff and Neil Patrick Harris, I just wanted everyone to break into song.
Mhm.
I'm like, is this a musical?
Yeah.
That's what I kept waiting for. And I don't know. That would have been the craziest thing in the world. It would have
make it like a
anything
Bollywood.
that would have breathed some more life
it's
into
like a
this.
Bollywood version of the Matrix. But yeah, I would say skip it.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna be like, you have to go see this movie, but if you've got it on streaming and you want to check it, it's okay.
All right. So what did we watch?
Right. So we just watched the first episode of Boba Fett, which is on Disney Plus, and it's not the Mandalorian season 2, but it is sort of
a spinoff.
What we get in the meantime. And the reason why I wanted to piggyback onto this is here is a series, right? That they've made into an episodic from the Star Wars franchise that I think does do that thing. You've got this huge canon timeline with a lot of empty gaps. Oh, so we see this. Oh, and then there's the Clone Wars. And you're kind of like, well, the Clone Wars was what, 30 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. So they've let some people creatively off the leash. And this one, we're back on Tatooine. We're following Boba Fett. And I don't want to spoil it because it's brand new, but I just want to talk about it in very general terms. I loved it. I thought it was really fun. And we get to explore the Sand People, and we see some Jawas and what happens to Boba Fett. And it's fresh. It is a walk down memory lane. We're going back to our beloved settings, but it's new aspects of those settings. So it's fleshing in stuff. And there's this kind of cool, like I didn't love the Star Wars prequels, but they did stuff with lightsabers that as a kid, I was always like, why don't they just take the lightsaber and like stick? It's like this they cut a hole in the door. And that's what happens right at the beginning. So I'm like, yeah, we're not just dinging lasers everywhere. We're actually burning holes and stuff with these. Yeah. So I feel like The Mandalorian and this new series totally gets that. Like if you were a kid in 1979 watching this, you'd be like, oh man, what would be awesome is if they were like, that part, what if they did like this other thing? And this series does a lot of that stuff.
We're getting to see, exact reproductions of sets that we really know well, but then also we're seeing other characters. And I thought it was neat. And this isn't any kind of a spoiler because this is in the little preview at the end of the last season of The Mandalorian, but we're in Jabba's palace, but we get to see other rooms in Jabba's palace that we've never seen before. Just that stuff is neat to me. But we get, I said this as we were watching it, I felt at times with the new Star Wars movies, the sequels, I guess,
7,
8, 9, and I didn't hate those. They were fine.
I thought they were fun,
but they felt a lot. They felt like fan fiction to me a lot of the time, and I don't really know exactly how to put my finger on this. But what they're doing with The Mandalorian and what this first episode of the Boba Fett show, you're getting the fan service. So we're seeing, so that's how that took place. That, we kind of wondered for the last 40 years or whatever, what happened in some of these situations. So we're definitely getting that. And they're bringing in, even just seeing certain ships and weapons and these kind of things that are little nods that it's just like, oh, it's cool just to see that. But they're also giving us new spins and new backstories on things that I just think is really handled in a way that to me does not feel like fan fiction.
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting distinction.
It's a great juggling act that
the fan fiction element is almost like an arbitrariness. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and stretching plausibility in a way that you're kind of like, yeah, I don't know exactly how to quantify that, but I feel like I know what you're talking about, and I agree.
It'll be interesting to me to see how this does And also when the Mandalorian, I mean, it's Star Wars, so there's an audience baked in, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when the Mandalorian comes back, because presumably, and this is a spoiler if people haven't seen the last season, but Baby Yoda, Grogu, gets taken away by Luke to go and do his training. So presumably you're going to have in the next season, the focus is going to go away from Baby Yoda.
Do we get Pedro Pascal again, or is he not?
No.
He's doing it.
He's coming back as far as I know, but you're going to, I'm assuming
they'd be fools not to keep Baby Yoda part of it.
They're gonna keep him a part of it, but I just wonder how much of it he's going to be, because you have this entire audience of, let's just say, people that aren't necessarily hardcore Star Wars fans that fell in love with Baby Yoda. And if you take there's a whole lot of people that just, it could be not even called The Mandalorian. It could be called the Baby Yoda Show.
Well, they might spin that off.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. But if you take Baby Yoda out of it, or if he's in it a lot less, do you lose some of those viewers? I wonder what will happen with that.
This is precisely the challenge we were talking about, is you try and make catch lightning in a bottle again by making Mandalorian season 2 some rehash version of Mandalorian season 1. No, you have to come up with the new Baby Yoda, right? You got to come up with something that another great hook. You can't just keep writing the same song,
right?
You have to come up with another great hook. I think it makes me think of Adele, because somehow she manages to put out another album that knocks people over backwards. Now, it's still Adele. You still love it because you love her voice and you love how she sings, but and there's similarities between Take It Easy on Me as the new single and Hello, and each big signal. Yeah, they're clearly, she's showcasing what she does best, but you don't feel like they're just the same song over and over and over.
Right.
So I think in season 2, they're like, all right, how are we going to come up with something as lovable and sticky and awesome and merchandisable as Baby Yoda? Well, good luck. If you do it, I can't wait to see it, because I want something new.
In hindsight, it's so simple that they came up with Baby Yoda, but also it's just such a genius thing, because you get
genius.
You had all the Star Wars fans that, there were a whole lot of Star Wars fans that didn't like the Ewoks, right? But there were people that did like the Ewoks, and I'm sure there are Star Wars fans out there that are just like, I hate Baby Yoda, he's terrible, but he's almost universally loved. And again, you have the people that aren't the hardcore Star Wars fans that you get drawn in by him,
right?
But you still have the old guys like us that are just like, I love Baby Yoda.
Well, I remember because we were we were the 6-year-olds for Star Wars, and by the time they got to Return of the Jedi, where we were seeing, I was like, why wasn't it the Wookiee planet? Like, what's with these cute
that was the original plan, yeah.
And we were the 12 or 13 by then, or I don't know how many years had gone by. But that was a movie for 6-year-olds.
Yeah.
Like, each one of those is aimed at kids because they want the kids to. And there's a whole story about, he had a bunch of little people that they didn't get what they wanted with a contract with Willow. So he wanted that. There's a whole story. But it wasn't for us anymore. I mean, they wanted us to enjoy it, but it was really aimed at our little siblings.
But they're smart, I think, also with what they're doing now, because I know a whole lot of people. I don't have kids. I know a whole lot of people who are big fans of The Mandalorian who don't have children, and so they're people our age, and maybe not even.
No, I agree.
And I know people that aren't gigantic Star Wars fans like us who also really enjoy The Mandalorian. Again, maybe sucked in by Baby Yoda, but they've done a really smart thing there, because kids are watching this, but you have adults, you probably have whole families watching it, but you also have adults watching it independent from children. So again, that's I
think there's so many strokes of genius.
Yeah.
To make it like the spaghetti westerns, to make him the kind of, he's not the silent man, but he's largely silent. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue, right? He's kind of the man with no name. He's the kind of Clint Eastwood in the spaghetti westerns. And they even do that with the music design. And each episode is a little like, oh, this is like Fistful of Dollars. And this one is like, it's just genius. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, he's got to get the kid, keep the kid away. He gets attached. Like my rules are basically, you don't get attached. Of course, he gets attached. And we all get attached too. So it doesn't feel like it's baby stuff. It feels like it's iconic primary colors, movie making, and storytelling.
Right.
It's just brilliant. And it all honors, for the fan base, it honors the texture of the original thing. They're not shooting it with actual models and everything anymore. They can do it all CGI, but they honor that look and the chroma and everything to make it look like the ships and the steel and the weapons and everything conform to that original vision.
With this first Boba Fett episode that we watched, there's I won't spoil anything, but there's a creature in this that we see, and it seems to be all CGI. Maybe when it's up close, that might be a rubber suit or whatever. But I felt like it, and you mentioned Harryhausen, even though I'm sure it's all CGI, they've done it in such a way that it looks kind of like it's stop motion,
And the design of it, is very, very. I don't want to spoil anything, but it does. I was like, well, that's homage, that right there. That's.
So I think I'm sure they're probably at times saying, okay, it's possible we could make this more photorealistic, but we also want it to tie in with the other films that they didn't have this technology then. So I'm just guessing.
There was a point at which CGI was more expensive. And that may still be the case in some applications of CGI, but I think if you are, for example, rendering armies at the gates, they have AI programs that not render all the little figures and then give all of the little figures their own, like, okay, well, that one of 1,000 little digital figures is, his foot's on fire. So he's, his little AI is doing that. And it's one big render.
Right.
So you're kind of letting the computer take over some creative, and with processing power now, you're not, you kind of set up the algorithm and then you just let it render for a day or whatever it takes. And I don't know that CGI is necessarily, I think it's cheaper in many cases than
probably now
building a practical set and going on location, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's one thing with these two series that I think they also have done really well is, they're these big budget things, but they also feel kind of small in a good way. So you don't have, for the most part, these, one of my criticisms of most of the superhero films now is they all kind of descend into just a giant CGI battle of, a bunch of
whirling dervish.
Yeah. And you don't really have that with these shows. You don't have these giant, everything doesn't just culminate in a big battle of CGI characters, bouncing off of each other. And so I like that, because again, that feels more in tone with now the prequels were like that, but and so they kind of look like a cartoon at times, but the original Star Wars films don't have that in them for the most part.
Right.
You didn't have the CGI stuff then. So that's another thing that I really like about these shows is the battles are kind of small in a positive way.
I quite agree.
So, we don't have to recommend this because I'm sure
we love it. I recommend.
Yeah,
check it out.
Gazillion streams.
It's not gonna be shy of viewers.
No. So, what do you want to do next?
Oh, you sent me that trailer that I was like,
Tales.
What is that? It looks bonkers.
So what made that, this kind of circles back to the Matrix. So I guess what we're going to do next week is Southland Tales, which was written and directed by Richard Kelly, who's the guy who wrote and directed Donnie Darko. And I think there's a little bit of a parallel with these Matrix films, because the scale is much different. But he did Donnie Darko, which has become this kind of big cult classic, and then went on and did 2 more films. I think that's it. He did the Southland Tales that has a big kind of all-star cast. And then he did another movie called The Box. And I think that's all he's done. So I think it's kind of similar to The Matrix in that, in my opinion, they had this great film with The Matrix, and then they've done these other things that have been, not received as well and haven't been as good. The difference is the budgets. They're able to continue working. And I think
Southland Tales is not related to Donnie
doesn't have
Darko.
anything to do with, I don't believe, I don't believe it has anything. It may be one, they did, I think, a comic with it too. It may
the
be
trailer makes it look like they're doing, it's Dwayne Johnson, right? And there's shots of him being like,
Justin Timberlake is in it. And
it looks like there's a comic element.
Yeah. So yeah, let's do that for next time.
Fantastic.
I think that's definitely a movie that a lot of people haven't seen.
I had never even heard of it. And you sent me that trailer and I was like, what is happening?
I believe it was 2006 when it came out.
Man, I hope it's
a weird movie.
I hope it's as enjoyable as the trailer is, because I just couldn't.
I saw it when it originally came out.
My eyebrows couldn't go any higher.
I don't remember a lot about it. So,
I mean, it can't be a great movie or we'd have heard of it. So we'll see.
It'll be an interesting discussion.
Yes. And
stomach's growling.
Thank you for joining us. We're
on the socials. We're on YouTube.
Yes, Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com.
We're on all the podcasts.
We're on the YouTube, where maybe you're watching us right now. We're on all the podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, if that's what you're listening to right now. Thank you so much for continuing to join us in our little chats.
Yes.
And if there's nothing else, we will talk to you next week.